Hey everybody, it is almost the end of the year. I cannot believe it. And as I do every year, and Tyler's going to join me for this one because his predictions are going to go in a different direction than mine, I'm sure. We're going to make some bold predictions for the stock market in 2024. Before we jump in, take a minute and click subscribe to my channel if you don't already, and check out the link you see on your screen. You can get the top 10 stocks to buy right now from our sponsor, The Motley Fool, and it's the best way to support this work Tyler and I are doing. Now, before we dive into this, I want to kind of emphasize, if it wasn't already obvious, that there is not a crystal ball on the desk behind me. I don't see one off to the side on Tyler's shelf right there. I see a book about France, but that doesn't help him predict the stock market. So take this with a grain of salt. These are meant to be bold predictions. Every year I do an article of bold predictions, and I'll be very happy if I get two or three of them right. These are meant to be things that I think can happen, but don't have a high probability to happen, but I think they're more likely than the market does. It's kind of how I look at bold predictions. So, first one, I think we are going to avoid a recession in 2024, or as the Fed likes to call it, a soft landing. So the recent inflation data has been very strong, not in the sense that there's high inflation, but in that the Fed is doing a good job, and that the 500 plus basis points of rate hikes we've had so far looks like it is taking effect, and it's finally really becoming apparent in the numbers. And we're seeing inflation come down significantly over the past year or so. I think that the Fed will not only stop raising rates, but I think we are going to avoid a recession altogether. Tyler, you think we're going to have a recession in 2024?
I don't. I'm not betting on it in any way. Labor market still seems relatively strong. Obviously, they haven't been seeing anything from the Federal Reserve rate to make them want to cut rates that would indicate that a recession is anywhere down the pipeline anytime soon. Uh, so just kind of based on I guess you could say the two big macro factors, we'll just say employment and inflation, it doesn't appear that way. And so I'm not, no, I don't think we're headed for a recession. I don't know if we're going to have gangbuster growth like we've had in the past couple of quarters where I think we had one, it was like 3.2%. But, that's positive is positive. It maybe not, maybe a little tepid, maybe a little milquetoast, but you can only expect so much when the labor market is where it is and inflation is cooling. So maybe not the boldest sounding thing in the world, but I would say a reasonably fair assessment.
So I'll follow that up with a bold one, and I'm gonna ask you what you think the top performing sector in 2024 is going to be, but I'll take a minute and think about it. So I think real estate, and this is kind of a bold prediction. If you look at what real estate's done in 2023, I think the real estate sector will be the top performing S&P sector in 2024. The reason I say that is because the real reasons that real estate has been beaten down for the most part is interest rates. And it's a very rate sensitive sector. Not only do rising rates tend to put pressure on dividend paying investments, but it also increases the cost of capital. Real estate, more than any other sector, relies on borrowed money to grow. It's kind of like if people buying a house relied on borrowed money to grow. So I think interest rates are going to come down a little faster than most people believe they are, which we'll get to a little bit more in a second. And the businesses behind most of the largest REITs are doing quite well. So I think those are going to combine, and we're going to see real estate really outperform the market by a significant margin in 2024. Tyler, I know you're a real estate fan, so I wouldn't be shocked if your answer is the same as mine. But what do you think is going to be the top performing sector in 2024?
I don't necessarily think I agree though, because I just kind of went on that uh, moment of not thinking there's a recession and thinking that labor is going to do okay. Probably, inflation might tick down, but if all of those things can happen without the Federal Reserve lowering rates, there's no real incentive for the Federal Reserve to lower rates. And so I kind of see a period of just maybe rates don't go up any further, but I just kind of see a hold steady at this higher interest rate environment. And with so much real estate debt coming due, there's going to be just large increases in interest rates for the refinance debt, and therefore higher interest expenses, and perhaps net profit margins, things like that, available cash might be a little bit thinner. So I don't know if I would go with real estate. I would actually look, this isn't really a sector, but I'm really optimistic on companies that have already sweated their assets and like brought down debt and are really well capitalized today to strike. If I want to give in a real estate example, Equity Commonwealth, which is basically like a REIT that's just a mountain of cash, just sitting there waiting to deploy into something. There are going to be distressed assets because of higher interest rates. And companies like that are going to be the ones that absolutely outperform. Anybody that's sitting on piles of cash, I think, are going to be the ones that are well positioned in this current environment.
So let's talk about the stock market as a whole for a second. So we've given some good examples of sectors we think are going to do well. And obviously, these are bold predictions. A lot can happen. I'm not saying I'm going to put all of my money into real estate or anything like that right now, although I do have a disproportionate amount there. But as a whole, I do think the stock market is going to have a pretty solid year in 2024, especially if that first prediction that we're going to have a soft landing comes true. I don't think we're going to see a 30% return year, but I could see the stock market rising by 10 to 15% this year if we can avoid a bad recession, if the Fed doesn't have to continue to raise rates, especially if interest rates start to fall, if the real estate market, I'm not talking the sector, if the residential real estate market starts to thaw, I think it could be a very bullish catalyst for the economy, and we could see the stock market actually perform really, really well this year. Now, again, if we knew that when the stock market was going to have a bad year, clearly we would just sell all of our stocks and sit on the sidelines for a while. And conversely, if we knew we would have a good year, we would be leveraged to the gills. We don't know that, so take that with a big grain of salt. But I think the signs point more toward the possibility of a good year in 2024 than a bad one.
So here's where it gets a little
Remember,
weird.
Bold predictions.
Here's where it gets weird for me, because when we talk about the market these days, we generally mean like the S&P 500, right? And the ownership of the S&P 500 has become so dominated by the top 10 players. You're basically saying the top 10 players are going to have a good year, right? And that's where I don't know if I just agree with that. If we were to say like all stocks, regardless of market cap, could have a good year, I think that's a whole different story. But if we're going to say like the market is like the S&P is going to go up, that's where I start to have pause, because it's basically saying like all of these very, very highly valued tech companies that are the 10 largest in the world, well, like 9 tech companies in Berkshire Hathaway are, going to grow at very, very high rates. And that's where I can't quite go with you there. Like if I were just using Apple, for example, Apple's currently trading at 30 times earnings. Great business, wonderful business. It's been growing at good clips for a while now, but at 30 times earnings, that is a very large expectation from investors. And I don't know if Apple's current growth trajectory meets that sort of expectation. So if I were to actually think about 2024 and maybe a little bit further, because of these valuations, I'm actually looking at probably positive, but well below like long-term average returns of the market. So somewhere in the low single-digit range.
Once again, thank you so much for joining me. Be sure to click subscribe if you don't subscribe to my channel already. And as always, this video is sponsored by The Motley Fool. Be sure to visit www.fool.com/Frankel to receive the top 10 best stocks to buy now.